free agency is almost here, and the Kings, for once, are a pretty attractive free agent destination. And obviously, with the trade of Rashawn Holmes on draft night, the Kings generated quite a bit of cap space. So it's an exciting time to see what they're going to do with that cap space. If the Kings renounce uh, the rights, all the to all their cap holds that they have, with Harrison Barnes being the big one, they will have over 30 million in cap space to work with in free agency. And this has obviously led to a lot of speculation on to who that could be used on. You know, whether it be a big swing on a guy or just using it on multiple different solid rotational guys. But obviously, this has led to a lot of speculation about Harrison Barnes' future and how he probably won't be on this team going forward because of all that cap space that got generated. But the first thing I want to talk about is just get this out of the way because I've seen it talked about a lot, and it's been talked about in the national media even, is this talk about Draymond Green possibly to the Kings. This guy that I have on this punching bag over here. And it just makes no sense. And I don't care about his personality, his stomp on Sabonis. That's not even why I'm saying this. He's obviously a good player, and if he fit, I would want him on the team. But it just makes no sense from a basketball perspective. People are just oversimplifying things, thinking like the Kings had a bad defense. Draymond Green's a great defender. Let's just put him on the Kings and it'll all be fine. But it just doesn't make sense at all because he was a great defender. He would improve the defense, and that's the positive. But he's not some athletic shot blocker, which is one thing we need defensively. And then on offense, it just doesn't make sense at all. We already have Domantas Sabonis, and Draymond Green and Domantas Sabonis are so similar offensively. They don't fit together at all. They're both non-shooters. And then we also have De'Aaron Fox out there who's not the best shooter. He's fine, but he's not the best. You can't play like that in today's NBA. You don't bring in Draymond Green and ruin one of like in terms of offensive rating, one of the best offenses of all time. You just don't do that. And so I just think that there's no way that's happening. And all the reports we're seeing are just people speculating. I've not seen one real reporter say anything about the Kings actually being interested in him. It's just Brian Windhorst going on national TV saying they have enough money and could make him an offer, but it's like it doesn't really make sense. He would be a great backup to Sabonis, but I don't think you pay a 33-year-old future Hall of Famer 4 years, $100 million to be a backup. And I'm pretty sure if he got moved to the bench, he would just start punching everyone on the coaching staff just like he did with Jordan Poole. It just seems like all this talk about Draymond to the Kings is Draymond trying to get leverage because it also makes no sense for him to leave the Warriors, in my opinion. And I just wanted to get that out of the way at the very start because I've seen so much about Draymond to the Kings and it just doesn't make sense. The next thing I want to talk about is Sasha Vezenkov, who, if you don't know, is a guy the Kings uh, got the rights to. He plays for Olympiakos in Greece, one of the best European players. And the reports are the Kings have made him an offer, and the reports, we don't know exactly what the offer is, but if I were to guess, the reports are a little weird. I don't know. There were some weird reports, but I think the offer probably is the room exception that we have because being under the cap, operating under the cap means we don't have the mid-level exception or the biannual exception. So we have the room exception, and I would assume we would offer him that, which I think is 2 years, 15.5 million total. And so it seems like we've already started our pursuit to get him, already made him an offer. So that's kind of the one thing that we know so far about what the Kings are doing in free agency. And so at this point, we have Fox, Herter, Keegan Murray, Sabonis, Davion Mitchell, Malik Monk, and then possibly Sasha Vezenkov in terms of guys that would play and be involved in the rotation a lot. And so Sasha Vezenkov, because a lot of people obviously haven't watched him. I have watched him for Olympiacos a little bit, and he does seem like the perfect fit into the Kings offense. He would play the four probably. It seems if we sign him, it's unlikely we bring Trey Lyles back, which kind of is disappointing because I really like what Trey Lyles gives this team. And I've talked about that before. But Vezenkov is a great shooter, and him being a backup to Keegan Murray, they do offer similar skill sets in being great shooters. He can come off of dribble handoffs and shoot, but he also is a solid playmaker and can make passes and almost play in a Sabonis passing role from the high post or really anywhere. He's not a center by any means like Sabonis, but he can be in that playmaking role. And so I think he's kind of more like Kevin Herter than Keegan Murray in a sense of being able to take things off the dribble when guys come to close him out and run him off the 3-point line. I think he can drive inside and make plays from there. He has a good floater, which I like. So it does seem like a good pickup offensively. On the defensive side of the ball, there is a lot to be desired, I think. He's just not the most athletic, but I do think he's a smart player. But he's not the guy who's going to come in and fix this defense. And so that's where the Kings need to look elsewhere for defensive players. I think there's a lot of talk about this team possibly being one piece away from being championship contenders. And I think a lot of the talk about that one piece is it could be OG Anunoby. I think Anunoby is the best guy the Kings could get. That's not a free agent signing. It would have to be a trade. So probably a lot of picks and maybe Davion Mitchell in there as a young, good player. OG has 1 year left on his contract, and so that's why there's a lot of talk about him being traded. I mean, there's been talk for a while now about him being traded. I don't know if the Raptors will want to trade him, but he would be almost the perfect guy for this team. I think the perfect guy for this team is a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. because he can shoot the ball, block shots. He's just a really big guy that could play the 4/5 with Sabonis. It doesn't really matter who you say is the 4 or 5, but they just play the front court together. And OG doesn't give you the size and rim protection of Jaren Jackson Jr. So that's the only place where, it's not fulfilling all of the Kings' needs, but he is a great perimeter defender. He led the league in steals last season, steals per game, that is. He does have an injury history, which isn't the best, obviously, but he can shoot the three, is a very reliable 3-point shooter, and would easily make this Kings defense so much better just by being able to guard the other team's best guard or wing player. That would be a pretty big swing for the Kings to make. And I honestly don't really see that happening. And the reason I don't see that happening is because of the cap space that has been generated. And I think that with the cap space, we're going to fill out our roster in free agency rather than with a big trade. Maybe there'll be smaller trades, but I don't think we're going to go for that big swing. I think it's more likely that, like I said, we either go after one big free agent or multiple solid guys. There always is the option that the Kings just run it back, do bring Harrison Barnes back, maybe bring Sasha Vezenkov over, and then extend Sabonis with the cap space. But I talked about it in my last video, why that would be disappointing. So I hope that doesn't happen. But if the Kings were to make a big swing on one free agent with most of the cap space, I think the possibilities are Kyle Kuzma, Jeremy Grant, Chris Middleton, Brooke Lopez, possibly, and maybe a guy like Cam Johnson. And not all of those guys would take up, 30 plus million, but they would be quite a bit of the cap space that we have. Of those guys that I just said, I don't want Brooke Lopez, even though he is a good fit on this roster because he offers, like I was kind of talking about with Jaren Jackson Jr., he offers the shooting and also rim protection. But I just think he's too old for what the timeline we're looking at. I think the same exact thing for Chris Middleton. I just don't would rather not go after the older guys. And Chris Middleton also doesn't address the defensive needs that this team has. And so then you look at the guys like Kuzma and Jeremy Grant, who I think are the guys that will more likely go after. I don't know if Jeremy Grant's thinking about leaving Portland, but if he is, he's a guy who I wanted the Kings to get uh last. Well, I wanted to trade for him in the draft because there was talks about, trading back one pick with Detroit last year, maybe getting Jeremy Grant, and I was really on board for that because I do like Jeremy Grant. He is a really solid defensive player, can average over 20 points per game. That doesn't mean he would do it on this team because there would be less of an offensive burden. I think he's proven with Denver that he can be a role player, like not one of the stars of the team, but still like one of like the best role player on the team. He would easily slot into that 4 spot in the starting lineup. And so he's a guy I really like. And then Kuzma is kind of similar, but he can create his own shot, which I think is something that we probably need more of outside of De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk, a guy who can create his own shot. He's not the most efficient offensive player, but I think within our offense, there's a place for maybe some inefficiency because everyone else is so efficient. And Kuzma, he's won a championship, been on a championship team, was the third best player on that team, has shown that he can be a good defender and that he can average 20 points per game. The reports are that he wants 30 million a year. I don't know if he would get all of that, but I think Kuzma, he fits the timeline. He's 27. I think that would be a really good fit for the Kings. And then the last guy I mentioned was Cam Johnson. He is a restricted free agent with the Nets, which is one reason why we might not go after him because we would have to give him an offer, tie up cap space, and then possibly not even get him. And then by the time we can use that cap space again, maybe the other free agents we want are gone. So that could be the risk we run going after Cam Johnson, but he would be cheaper than a Kyle Kuzma or a Jeremy Grant while offering not definitely not the same level of offensive creation that those other guys give, but still a solid 3-point shooter, a solid defender, and just pretty much providing everything that Jeremy Grant and Kuzma could provide, minus the extra creation. And that's why he would be paid less than those guys. Then we can look at who the Kings could get if they didn't tie up all their cap space into one guy. So multiple guys you get. Bruce Brown, who is probably going to command a bigger salary than what the Nuggets can give him, although it's still possible he could stay with the Nuggets, but we could offer him more. A guy like Josh Hart, Naz Reid, Christian Wood, Kelly Oubre, Dylan Brooks, even Dennis Smith Jr., Rui Hachimura, PJ Washington, Josh Richardson, all guys that the Kings could possibly go after. And so the guys that I like the best out of that group are Bruce Brown, Josh Hart, Naz Reid, and a very controversial pick of Dylan Brooks. I'll start with the Dylan Brooks because a lot of people are turned away from him because of, his personality and him constantly talking trash and not addressing the media and all the drama he had with the Grizzlies. But when you look at his play on the court, he is one of the best wing defenders in the entire league. And that is something the Kings sorely need. His 3-point shooting leaves a lot to be desired. His shot selection leaves a lot to be desired. But I think when you look at the difference between the culture in Memphis versus Sacramento, like Dylan Brooks is going to land somewhere. And maybe the Kings locker room is the best place for him to land because Mike Brown is going to have none of Dylan Brooks nonsense. And I think that coming to the Kings could allow him to grow in and change the perception that people have of him. And he might also be able to thrive in an offense that's just way better than the Grizzlies offense, where in the Grizzlies offense, I mean, he's chucking up shots. They're not smart shots, but it's also because the Grizzlies offense isn't going to do anything else. And in the Kings offense, he would get a lot better opportunities. Then you look at guys like Bruce Brown and Josh Hart, uh, probably pretty similar in the amount of money that they'll command in free agency. Bruce Brown, obviously being a part of the Denver Nuggets championship squad, raised his value a whole lot. I really liked him when he was on the Nets. He's not the biggest guy, which is the worry when fitting onto the Kings. We probably need someone who's bigger in the starting lineup. And then also him just being a starter. Like, I think he's a great bench player or fifth starter on a team with more star power than the Kings have. And so my worry is with him about him being overpaid possibly, and then we would slot him into the starting lineup and he wouldn't totally fit into the starting lineup. I think he would be great as a bench player, but I just think another team is going to offer him more money or more of a role, and the Kings shouldn't offer him that much money to be a bench player. So that's my worry with Bruce Brown, but he is a great player, a great defensive player, can be a solid catch and shoot three guy, a really good cutter, which we saw worked really well with Jokic and I think would work similarly well with Sabonis. And so if you could get him as a bench player, that would be great. I just don't think that will actually happen. So that's probably why he's unrealistic. Josh Hart might be similar, but I mean, really, I'm not sure what other teams are going to offer these guys. But Josh Hart again would be a really solid bench player, like six man, giving us the rebounding and just hustle. But I don't think he's a starter. I think guys like PJ Washington or Rui Hachimura would be better fits probably for the Kings just because they're bigger guys. And the Kings are just a small team, and that was a problem at times. Nas Reed is a guy you could get as a backup center. If we could get him as a backup center, that would be great. And if we could sign him, that just means he can't kill us when he's on another team. And so that would be awesome because he kills us every time he plays us. He just adds that offensive versatility as a center, can stretch the floor, which would be great, and which we haven't had with a center last season. Right as I got off recording, I look at Twitter. Nas Reed has agreed to a 3-year, $42 million deal with the Timberwolves. So disregard whatever I said about Nas Reed. He's off the table. We'll have to look for another backup center. Maybe it's Kata. Maybe it's someone else. I don't know. We'll see. But I think my biggest worry with using the cap space on two or three guys as opposed to like one big signing and then, maybe a few other little signings is that there's a big hole in our starting lineup. at the 3-4 position. And I don't think anyone in free agency totally fills that role. Now, we could get more depth and our bench could be really good if we don't go for that big swing. But I want the Kings to use the cap space to get a bigger name because this is the only time we're going to have cap space. We're not going to have cap space in the future. We're going to, re-sign Sabonis next offseason. And then after that, we're just going to be totally tied up when it comes to the salary cap. There are a few other guys that could possibly fit into our starting lineup that aren't in free agency and that would come via trade. There was a time when I was thinking maybe Jaylen Brown could be that guy, but he'll he'll stick with the Celtics. And then, I was thinking maybe Mikal Bridges is available. And then there were reports that they were turning down massive offers for him. So, including, I think it was like number 3 pick from Portland and Anthony Simons, which is kind of crazy to me. So it's a no-go on him, I think. And then I mentioned OG Anunoby. Pascal Siakam could be an option and has been mentioned with the Kings in trade talks. He would immediately fill that power forward spot. But reports are that the Raptors don't want to trade him. The Hawks are trying to get the Raptors to trade him, but they apparently aren't. But speaking of the Hawks, the more realistic one that has been talked about for like the entire time John Collins has been in the league is John Collins. And as I'm editing this, John Collins has been traded to the Jazz for practically nothing, which just tells me the Kings could have traded for him, didn't want him, as I'm kind of going to explain why here. So, in a way, that's kind of a relief, but things are moving very fast right now. And John Collins is a guy that I've been very skeptical about and who I know, like, he's a very polarizing player, I think, for Kings fans. Some people think he's our Andrew Wiggins, where if he comes here, his career will be revived and he'll be back to a near star level player because of the fit on the team. And I could see it happening, but I'm very skeptical. He's got a pretty big contract for a guy that did so little last season. He provides rebounding, he provides some three-point shooting, slashing, and he would most likely be the cheapest option. Well, he would definitely be the cheapest trade option of any of the guys that I've listed. But I'm very skeptical about taking a swing on a guy like that. And I think for me, of all the names I've listed, the ones that I want the most are Kyle Kuzma and Jeremy Grant. And the one that I see as most likely is Kyle Kuzma. For multiple reasons. One, Jeremy Grant, I would say, is more likely to stay in Portland. And then two, Kuzma has been connected to the Kings before, obviously, in that Buddy Hield trade debacle where he then ended up going to Washington because of the Russell Westbrook trade. So Monte McNair has obviously shown that he's interested in Kuzma and that he likes him, and that is the option that I like the most for the Kings. And then as for the bench, the center position and just one of the wing positions is also pretty empty. Could Neemias Queta step up and fill that role as a center, or maybe we go and sign someone in free agency who no one's really even thought about? I'm guessing we'll pick up the option on Kessler Edwards deal, but unless we need that cap space for something, but I doubt we will because it's only like 1.9 million, I think. So could he step up and be a guy that wing player, that 3-and-D guy in the bench rotation? Or could a guy like Colby Jones step up? I doubt we'll bring back Terrence Davis, which I talked about in the last video because of who we drafted. And I've talked about all this, gone through so many scenarios, and in the end, Monte McNair is probably going to do something totally different than anything I said, because that's his MO. He always pulls something out that no one's thought of, and it has pretty much worked every single time to this point. The Kings are obviously still a young team, but not super, super young. This is the time where we could go for it in these next few years. Could it be this year that we go all in? It definitely could be. You look at the ways that teams improve. It's the draft, it's internal growth, it's free agency signings, and it's trades. This is the season where we can improve through free agency signings, and that will probably not be the case in the future. After this, we'll have to either rely on late draft picks, internal growth, or big trades. We're obviously hoping that Keegan Murray can develop into a star player, and that would bring us to the next level. We're obviously hoping that Colby Jones becomes a rotational player. Maybe Jalen Slauson becomes a rotation player. You never know. But the Kings can definitely get a guaranteed really good player in free agency here, maybe multiple. So that is why it is so exciting. And we probably won't have this type of excitement going into free agency in a very long time. Anyways, that is it for this episode of the Royal Report. Let me know your thoughts on everything I discussed in this video, who you guys want the Kings to go after in the comments below. If anything happens between now and the start of free agency that's big enough for me to make a video, then I'll definitely make a video on it. And if, well, once things happen in free agency, I will obviously make a video with whatever we do. So until then, I will see you guys later. Peace.